Hi there, it's Jordan and welcome to Jordan's Debate Hour. Today we are discussing a necessary part of not only our government but a basic right given to us by the government we get to choose. Yes, today we are talking all about voting. From requirements to actually casting your vote, we will cover all aspects of voting. To help us discuss the topic of voting, my friend Bonnie will be coming on the podcast. Let's dive right in and get Bonnie out here. Give a big welcome to Bonnie.
Thank you, and thanks for having me today, Jordan. I'm really excited to discuss the topic of voting today.
Thank you for coming on the podcast and helping me educate the audience in voting. Bonnie, as you know, many of our listeners are just getting out of high school and entering the real world. One aspect of entering the real world is voting. How does someone begin the process of letting their voice be heard through the freedom of voting?
Well, before you can even think about voting, there are several requirements that must be met in order to vote. The requirements in Michigan to vote include being a U.S. citizen, being at least 18 years old by election day, a resident of Michigan, and being a resident of the city or township where you are applying to register to vote.
Since I meet all these requirements, can I vote?
Yes, but first you have to register to vote.
How do I or the listeners do that?
Actually, you and possibly some of your listeners have already completed the first step in registering to vote, meaning the voting requirements doubles as the first step in the registration process. The second step in the process of voting is to obtain an application and complete it in at least 30 days before an election.
How does someone go about obtaining an application?
You can receive an application at your local branch of the Secretary of State, your local clerk's office, or online at www.michigan.gov/SOS. The third step in voting registration process is to submit your application to your local clerk's office. You can either hand deliver your application or you can mail it in. If you do decide to mail in your application, you must include a photocopy of your driver's license or a photocopy of something that states your name and address, such as a bill or a payment statement. The fourth step is to actually process your voting application, in which you will receive a voter registration card, which tells you where you can cast your vote in upcoming elections. The fifth and final step in the process is to actually vote, but to be sure to bring an acceptable form of identification, such as your driver's license, or you will have to sign an absentee in order to vote.
Okay. With all these steps completed, then you can vote, right?
Yes, you are ready to vote in any upcoming elections.
Now that someone is registered and everything, how do you actually cast your vote in upcoming elections?
Now that the process of registering to vote is completed, you first have to figure out where your polling location is.
Polling location? Is that where a voter can cast their vote?
Yes, you can determine your polling location by contacting your local election office or online at vote.michigan.gov/MVIC.
After figuring out where to vote, what is next in the voting procedures?
Next, you go to your specific polling location and bring with you your form of identification, as I discussed earlier. You proceed to check in with the staff to be sure you're on the voting registration. Then you can mark your optical scan ballot.
An optical scan ballot?
Yes, in Michigan elections, an optical scan ballot is used. All you need to do is to darken an oval or connect the head and tail of an arrow next to each of your choices on the ballot. The ballot is then fed into a machine called the tabulator, which scans and records the votes.
Is that simple?
Yes, however, people with certain disabilities may use the AutoMark voter assistant terminal, which will cast their votes with a keypad device. The device will not count their votes, but will send the votes to the tabulator, which will then count their votes. Other than that, the process of voting is complete and you have just voted.
People may think that the process of becoming a voter and actually voting is a hassle. Combine that with people tending to have the mindset that voting does matter and their vote will not matter in the end. What can you say to those people who may feel that way?
To those people who feel this way, I say the effort of becoming a voter is definitely worth it. As a country united, we are given the right and freedom to choose our government, our officials, and our laws. Some countries cannot say that. Your vote may feel insignificant because there are millions of people in the country, but every vote matters. Several times in history, items were decided by just one vote, such as Hitler's rise to power or Texas's decision to join the Union. So do not believe that your vote does not matter because it may affect more than you think.
Very powerful statements, and I could not agree with you more. The younger generation needs to value the democratic society we live in today and continue to vote and voice their opinions. Are there any upcoming elections our listeners might be interested in?
Yes, there is one upcoming election that voters should turn out for. May 5th is the general election for cities to decide whether or not to raise the state tax from 6 to 7% in order to obtain funds to fix road and other services.
I'll be sure to get the polls on May 5th to cast my vote. I hope our listeners do too.
Me too.
Well, that about does it for today's podcast. Thank you, Bonnie, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jordan.
Be sure to listen to our Old Jordan Debate Hour podcast and sure to be here next week for a brand new episode. Bye, everyone, and see you next week.